History of Ruthenians. Ruthenians, also known as Rusins, were never legally recognized as an independent nation. They resided primarily in a region that was identified as the Austro-Hungary Empire, particularly along the Carpathian mountain range. These Ruthenians were also called Carpatho-Rusins. The Rusins speak a Slavic tongue and write using the Cyrillic alphabet used by Russians and other Slavics. Most Rusins lived as agriculturalists in villages along the mountains and hills, and many herded sheep. Rusins began immigrating to the United States throughout the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. This mass migration occurred primarily because their precarious lifestyle on their land was threatened by population growth and the strain of natural resources. By 1914, about 225,000 Rusins had migrated to the United States. I hesitated before stepping onto the gangplank leading to the massive ship before me. I knew boarding the ship would change my life forever, regardless of whether or not I succeeded. Everything I knew in the world, including all of my friends and family, would be left behind, but infinite possibilities lay before me. I had already answered the appropriate questions properly, as I had been instructed. I was healthy enough to pass my initial medical inspection, and had proven my ability to read and write. I was all set to board, but suddenly the decision seemed too life-altering to process all at once. Impatient murmurings from the people in line behind me prompted me to leave my reverie and finalize my decision. I took a deep breath and proceeded to the ship that would take me to America. Others crowded in behind me, pushing and shoving me onto the deck of the ship, eager for their chance to board. A broad and tan man stopped me just as I stepped foot on deck. "Ticket," he asked. I caught the heavy scent of rum on his breath. I handed him the slip of paper that took months for me to save up to purchase. I also gave him the passport that was supposed to allow me to travel to America. He glanced at it briefly, grunted approvingly, and let me through. There was no turning back now. "This way," a husky male voice and a stiff arm directed me down a narrow set of stairs below the deck. The first level within the ship was clean and spacious. I knew that these corridors were for the first and some second-class travelers only, but it gave me hope that my third-class corridors would be moderately tolerable. Unfortunately, that hope was unfounded. The man opened a heavy wooden door within the bows of the ship and gave an ironic welcoming wave toward the dark room behind the door. "Here you are," he said. "We set off in 20 minutes. Be here when we set sail or get thrown off the ship." I couldn't tell if he was joking or not, but I knew I was not about to test him. I stepped inside to investigate my new quarters. There were no windows, no lights. It smelled of must and rat droppings, and the wooden floors were beginning to rot. I hesitantly placed a hand on one of the walls and immediately recoiled. Each of the walls was coated in a thin layer of sticky grime. Other third-class passengers began to file in behind me, placing their bags on the floor to claim their space. Horrified, I backed out of the room slowly before turning and running back up the stairs. There was no way I could stay in that putrid room for God knows how long with dozens of other passengers. I needed the air and I needed to see the sky and be out in the open. I ran to the bow of the ship and pressed against the railing, breathing deeply in the fresh, salty air. The sea was bright blue and the air pulled and tangled my hair. I heard the gull cry out and looked up to see him scarf down a tiny piece of bread in midair. One of the sailors must have tossed it to him out of pity. The scene gave me hope. Everything was so beautiful and strange. It was so different from the mountains and valleys and farmlands back home in the Carpathians, which were everything I had ever known. It reminded me of what I was about to enter. America was the land of possibility and hope. I could be anything I wanted and do anything I wanted. I reminded myself of why I was doing this, why I had to get out of the Carpathians and make a new home. There was no opportunity back home for me anymore. Our villages were too crowded, the natural resources were strained, there were too many people and too many sheep, and not enough land. My older brother, Ellis, had already moved and settled in and sent word that America was safe. Pittsburgh, he said, was the name of the city where I was supposed to meet him. Supposedly, it is where a large number of other Rusins gathered and lived. There was work to be found, Ellis told us, and plenty of other musicians. He played the cymbalum with a gypsy band of other Rusins in local coffee houses when he was not working, and sometimes people left him tips. He had been gone for over 2 years, and he did not say that he missed the Carpathians, but he did miss all of us. My parents thought they were too old to come. Father claimed he would rather die on our homelands than live as a stranger in America, and Mother naturally agreed with him. On the other hand, both parents adamantly refused to let Brill, my sister, come with me. They said she was too young to make the trip. It broke my heart to leave her behind, but I knew I had to get out and make a life for myself, somewhere that would let me grow beyond sheep herding and farming. The only way I could leave her was by promising I would send for her as soon as I possibly could. If my parents knew I was safe and successful in the new world, they would have to let Brill join me. I had to do this for her. I had to go to America and find work and be successful so she could have a life of opportunity and hope. Cramming myself in that tiny, disgustingly dark room and traveling to America was the only way Braille had any hope for a future. Thinking of it this way gave me the motivation I needed to force myself to go below decks and settle in for the long voyage ahead. I stole one last glimpse of the glittering sea, took a deep breath, and once again made my way down the stairs leading to my quarters. The room was much more crowded now, with others settling in with their belongings and claiming their own floor spaces. I found an open area in the corner and sat down. Luckily, someone had been prepared enough to bring a few candles. A dim, flickering light filled the room. I fidgeted and dug around in my bag until I found the only photograph I owned. It was a picture of my family. Brelle was just a child in the photograph, and she sat in my lap and gave the camera a pouty stare. Her fierce determination and fearlessness would be her greatest asset in America, and I knew she would prove it the second she was able to join me. I vowed to myself that I would do whatever it took to be successful so Brelle could have her chance at a real life. History of immigrants' journeys. A large majority of immigrants coming to the United States in the early 1900s, almost 95%, were joining family members or friends who had already crossed over and settled in. After 1900, immigrants were required to have a passport from their home country as well as a ticket before they could come to America. After the 1883 U.S. immigration law passed, they were also required to answer up to 31 questions before boarding a ship, as well as pass a cursory medical inspection. Many immigrants had to travel large distances just to get to a port where they could sail to the United States. On board, there were three classes of passengers: first, second, and third, or steerage. The third-class passengers, the most poor, were detained the longest on Ellis Island. Steerage passengers were also confined to tight, crowded, and poorly ventilated rooms within the bowels of the ships and given little access to fresh air. To pass the time, these passengers sang, played cards, danced, practiced English, and rehearsed their answers to inspectors' questions. Day 12. Life on the ship. I woke up, rolling into the person laying beside me. She grunted and turned away. A particularly large wave must have rocked the boat a little harder than normal. I sat up and pulled out my guitar, quietly strumming a few simple chords and humming a classic tune. In America, I wanted to join my brother when he played with his gypsy band in coffee shops and on street corners. It was still early in the morning, but a few other passengers stirred and watched as I played. Someone started humming along, and we made brief eye contact, sharing a smile. Our confines were tight, crammed, and particularly at this point of the journey, filled with the acrid odor of bodily fluids and sickness. The food was mostly unidentifiable mush, and it all tasted the same. With any luck, we would be within sight of Ellis Island in just a few days, but on ship, each day was an eternity. However, today was a good day. The crewman who delivered our food yesterday told us we would be allowed to go on deck today and get some fresh air. These days were the best, and often the only thing that kept me sane throughout the voyage. We generally went above decks in shifts. With roughly 25 passengers in this room, 5 of us would be allowed above for 20 minutes at a time. Then we would be escorted back to our room, and the next group would be rotated in. Across from me, an elderly man began coughing uncontrollably. I cringed and turned away. The fresh air could not come soon enough. There were several young kids in our room who occasionally whimpered and whined to their mothers. They wanted to be free. It was almost too much to ask for kids at that age to remain quiet and well-behaved in such tight quarters for so many days. More people woke up and began talking. A young couple on my right started playing a card game together. I heard a few friends spitting rumors about America across the room. Many of the passengers had developed a fast connection and easy relationship throughout the voyage. After all, we were all here for similar reasons, and we were all trying our best to make it in the new world. Some passengers even passed along advice given from spouses and families and friends who had already settled in America. Now, as we were only a few days away from inspection before entering the new country, several passengers held rehearsal sessions in which they asked each other the questions we would be asked upon entering Ellis Island. There were only a few other people on board from the region near my home, and I could only fully understand a few of the others' conversations. I had traveled to Poland to set sail out of the Baltic Sea. Most of the passengers were Polish, and some were German. Very few were from the Slavic or Romanian region where my village was. Many of the passengers spoke in English as practice for entering America, but my English was really limited. As such, I spent most of my time quietly listening to the others. I also provided most of the entertainment for the other passengers when I had my guitar out. Even the people I could not communicate with directly, due to language barriers, seemed to enjoy humming along to the gypsy tunes I knew on the guitar. Any activity that made the time pass faster was like gold on the ship. My brother told me everything I needed to know about getting through Ellis Island as quickly as possible. He also warned me of the health inspections, and although it was impossible to fully maintain my personal hygiene in the crammed and filthy room we were confined in, I still did my best to avoid the passengers who seemed the most sick. I also forced myself to eat the food given to us at least once a day and to drink water whenever it seemed clean. I knew keeping my strength and health was vital to passing into America. Many of the passengers were repulsed by the food we were provided on the ship and refused to eat it. However, these people seemed to grow weaker each day. If they made it to America, they would not seem healthy and ready to enter the new world. Only one passenger has died so far in this voyage, and it was an elderly man who had seemed sick before even entering our quarters. My brother warned me that death was not uncommon on a ship traveling from Europe to America. It was disturbing and wretched, but we all knew the risk of being on the ship. We were crammed together with no way to clean ourselves and fed slop for food. But we were here because we believed there was something about living in America that was more important than any of the risks involved in the process of getting there. Just then, a crewman entered with our noontime food. I got excited, thinking this would also be the start of our out on deck for the day. The start of our time out on deck for the day. He greeted us with even better news. We're ahead of schedule. Got a hold of some good winds. Tomorrow the Statue of Liberty will be in sight, he said gruffly, handing us our portion of food and leaving before we had time to react. The room erupted in cheers as the door closed behind the crewmen, and suddenly everyone was chattering and laughing and smiling. No matter the difficulty in this day, we all knew we could last one more night on the ship if it meant we reached our chance of freedom and opportunity tomorrow. Further details of Ellis Island. Between 1892 and 1954, over 12 million immigrants passed through the federal immigration station located on Ellis Island before entering the United States. The majority of immigrants passing through Ellis Island, about 80%, were processed and allowed entrance to the country within several hours. The estimated 20% of immigrants who were detained for further testing and examination were largely released within a couple days' time. Only about 2% of immigrants were deported and returned to their home country. Day 14, Ellis Island. We arrived in the lower bay of New York Harbor at 3 p.m. the next day and awaited our on-ship inspections. Although we could hear the inspectors come on board, walking around us and talking, they did not inspect any of the rooms full of third-class passengers. From what we could hear and the things told to us by an occasional crewman, it sounded like the inspectors were here only for the upper-class people who could afford the first- and second-class tickets. These people were given a routine medical examination before they were allowed access to New York City. While they were given the chance to bypass Ellis Island, all the third-class passengers were required to undergo more thorough examinations at the island. After the inspectors left, the ship continued to dock in Manhattan, releasing almost all of the first- and second-class passengers into the city. Finally, a crewman came to our room and led us up the stairs. Everyone should exit to the left and wait for further instructions, he told us. I caught the gist of his meaning, but asked the nearby Slavic for clarification in case I miss an important detail. There was a collective gasp as we stepped above decks and saw what each of us recognized as the single greatest symbol of freedom and opportunity in the world, the Statue of Liberty. She was massive and stoic in a beautiful shade of pale green. I caught glimpses of tears in the eyes of several passengers as they absorbed the reality of the statue's meaning. We had made it. We were here. We were each tagged with a slip of paper that identified our names and manifest number, ushered off of the boat and into a waiting area, and divided into groups of 30. From there, we began our testing at Ellis Island. My brother told me that if I answered the questions correctly, could explain that I had family and a little money waiting for me, and passed the health inspections, I could be out of Ellis Island and into the land of opportunity in as little as a few hours. My legs were still wobbly from the long days at sea, and my stomach was full of nervous butterflies, but I was so beyond ready to start making a new life for myself in this new country. A young man wearing glasses spoke to our group, repeating his instructions in multiple languages so that each of us could understand what was happening. He led us up a steep set of stairs into a room where doctors examined each of us, seeming to observe our face, neck, and hands. Occasionally, the doctor would mark something on an immigrant's tag, and that person would be moved into another room. I assumed something about these people must be questionable, and further testing was required. Thankfully, I passed through with ease and was ushered into the next room of doctors, inspecting the eyes of those who passed through. In this room, there were many more people who were detained for further tests. My brother had warned me that trachoma, a disease affecting the eyes, had caused many people to be deported each year. Again, I passed through unscathed. I was almost done. According to Ellis, only the questioning remained. The question should be easy, only verifying the information I had given before boarding. I trembled as my time to be interrogated arrived. I knew there was no reason to be nervous, but I also knew how much was at stake if I messed something up. I still felt as though Braille's future was in my hands. Eventually, I was called into the interrogation room. I took a deep breath and proceeded forward. The questioning took mere minutes. The interrogator hammered a barrage of questions at me relentlessly. Where are you from? What's your full name? Are you a polygamist? Are you coming to America to work? Where do you plan to work? Are you meeting family here? Where do they live? And etc. I answered each one quickly, concisely, and honestly. Finally, I was free to enter the new world. History of Ruthenians in America. Most of the initial Rusin immigrants in America were men, who eventually married or brought the rest of their families to the United States. Despite the fact that most Rusins were agriculturalists in their home country, few received farming jobs in America. Instead, many flocked to the coal mining industry in eastern Pennsylvania. Many also found work in the iron mines of Minnesota and the silver and gold mines in Colorado. However, the increasing steel industry of Pittsburgh and its neighboring towns proved to be even more important to the Carpatho-Rusins than mining. Most Rusin women had very limited English skills and received low-paying jobs as nannies, servants, or cleaning ladies. Day 50. Life in the United States. I have now been living with Ellis, my brother, for about a month. We live in a small apartment in the heart of the city that we can afford with our combined incomes. He works in the steel industry, which, as I've gathered from him, is growing immensely in Pittsburgh. He believes his job will provide a stable and secure income for us for years. There were not many options for me, as a young woman with limited English-speaking skills. However, I was fortunate because Ellis knew a man at his work who needed a nanny in his home. He must have been desperate, because when Ellis told him he had a sister who needed work, the man nearly begged Ellis to get me to consider the position. I thought it was strange that a woman could not care for her own children, but I could not refuse the opportunity for a stable income. So now I take care of 3 young children in a wealthy American's home each day. With our combined incomes, Ellis and I should be able to send for Brielle in a matter of months. When my parents are ready to part with their beloved youngest daughter, she is welcome in America, where she can find work and new opportunity to live freely. I will write to her and send her the money as soon as I possibly can. There are many other Carpatho-Rusins living in Pittsburgh. Most of the men do exactly what Ellis is doing, apparently sensing the security of jobs in the steel industry. I have found several other women who nanny for other local families. Many of the Rusin women also have jobs cleaning offices in huge buildings within the city. The Rusins have a vibrant community within Pittsburgh. Most attend church together, not only as a religious tradition, but also as a way of establishing our culture and building a community together. My favorite part of America is, by far, playing the guitar with my brother's gypsy band. Every day we gather on a busy street corner, or, if they don't kick us out, a coffee house, and we play. The music lifts our spirits and makes us smile, and the tips help us pay for extra food and other necessities. I think it helps keep us sane during the rough days. After everything I've gone through, I'm grateful for the opportunity America gave me. I would never have been anything other than a poor sheep herder back home. Here in the United States, I have hope for advancement. I'm already learning better English and improving my writing skills. America has given me the chance to determine my future for myself.